Hi, my name is Juan Nava. I'm a senior field engineer here at Intrepid. Today we're going to be covering Gateway Builder. I'm going to be covering the most common use case that I see out in the field today. There's certainly more use cases that I'm not going to be covering today, and we're going to be covering from start to end. So we're going to be covering the wiring as well. So let's go through our agenda. So we're going to be covering what the Gateway Builder is, and we're going to be talking a little bit about licensing. That's not very long. We'll be talking about wiring, and it's just because of what I've seen, I want to make sure that this part is fairly clear. We're going to be covering Gateway Builder, of course, with the most common use case, which is a bidirectional gateway. We're going to be talking about how to inject faults. Some of the fault injections we're going to be covering are how to create a loss of communication, how to change a value, as it's en route, and then how to link all this together within using a graphical panel. So gateway is a method to transfer information from one bus over to another. So we have a couple different configurations where we can create a gateway from. And like configuration 1, which usually it's the most common one that I see, certainly not the only option. We usually see configuration 2 as well. But usually the one that I run into the most is configuration 1, where we want to isolate a module from the rest of the system. That's because either we want to alter messages that are getting to the module, usually not necessarily the message at times, usually maybe a specific signal, but maybe we want to create loss of communication where we want to test individual messages to make sure that maybe diagnostics are being set properly, like DTCs, for example. We can use a fire 2, for example. In this case, we have in parentheses fire 2, but really what you need is anything that has two CAN channels. So a value CAN 4-2 would be one that you could use, a red 2, a fire 3, ion. So anything that has 2 channels, you can use to leverage this. Configuration 2, we're not going to be covering today, but really this is where we want to gateway information gateway for information from network over into instrumentation. So Gateway Builder does let us change the type of communications over to a different protocol. So for example, if we have if the communication between ECU1 and ECU2 is a CAN-FD with BRS with a bit rate switch on, but we need CAN-FD without the bit rate switch, we can go into our Gateway Builder and modify that communication to be without the bit rate switch, or we can switch that over to regular CAN. Now, when we're creating a gateway, in order to create this gateway, we do need to break the communication between the ECU and the rest of the vehicle. Now, the best non-destructive method of doing this would be to use a breakout box. You can certainly cut wires, but usually you want to be able to put the vehicle or the system back to its normal state without altering, especially if it's a vehicle that's going to be sold, for example. You definitely don't want to destroy cables or wires. So Gateway Builder is really easy to use drag and drop GUI that's within Vehicle Spy, specifically in the Enterprise version or the Enterprise edition. You can create complex gateways before CAN and LIN. And these can be used with using your PC, but they can also be used with Core Mini. Core Mini is a way to run the device without your PC attached, but you can also use it at the same time with your PC. In the past, you could have done this with function blocks. Now, function blocks, even though they're fairly easy to use, they are time consuming. I remember a time before Gateway Builder existed, for me to create a fairly complex gateway, I did use function blocks, and it took me about 5 days. Years later, after this was available, I ended up going back to just kind of see what it would do, and I was able to create the same exact setup in about 30 minutes. So that is huge. So 5 days to 30 minutes, I take that any day. In order to use this feature, you do have to have Vehicle Spy Enterprise. This is not available in the Basic or the Pro. If you want to create a gateway with Pro, you do have to use function blocks. If you want to use the Gateway Builder, in order to save time, you do need to upgrade your license to a Vehicle Spy Enterprise, or you might want to start off with that level of licensing. Now, in the setup that I'm going to be using today, it's basically I'm creating a little network, or a very simple network with a couple of modules. So in this case, I'm just using some of our products in order to create that. Now, this could be the same thing as if maybe I was using a body control module, for example, in a network where maybe the engine control modules in there, as well as maybe the transmission control module. So in this case, it's a very simplified system that I'm going to be using. And then to do this gateway, I'm going to be using a Valley CAN to do this. So if I'm just simply going to be monitoring our bus, well, really I only need one channel from our Valley CAN in order to monitor that bus. So in this case, the orange line represents our dual wire CAN. And here these points represent where we're kind of connecting to it. Red is your power, your 12 volts, and then ground, of course, is your ground. In this case, I am using a power supply. Now, the Valley CAN I'm using specifically because the Valley CAN is actually powered by the PC. So this would not actually be powered by by my external power source or my power supply. But one thing to understand is that you do need to have a common ground in your device to the system. Otherwise, things will look funny, things will act funny. So you got to make sure that you ground in this case, like the Valley CAN with the system. If for some reason you're using like a Fire 2 to create the gateway, or even just to monitor communications, perhaps you're running a separate power supply to power the device because you might be running low voltage conditions, for example. You still need to ground the device down to the system. Usually chassis ground will work perfectly fine. If you don't do this again, this will cause things to act funny or read incorrectly. Now, how can we connect to these cables? Well, we can use these piercing connectors. So in this case, these they have a little like a needle, maybe a nail, perhaps, probably more like a needle, and this will actually pierce into the insulation of the wire and then touch the actual copper inside of it. Now, if you're not careful when you pierce these wires, you might actually break a strand or a couple of strands inside the wire. So you do want to be careful. Now, this is a little bit destructive, so I'm always going to recommend that you use a breakout box or a breakout harness in order to do this, to avoid doing this. That way, the harness is the one that you're really interacting with your connectors. I don't have a really good example to show you of a breakout harness or a breakout box. Everything that I found online has all copyrights, and I don't have one where I can show you this. So in this case, this is what I had to show you. Now that I showed you how we're going to monitor this specific system, let's go ahead and start with Vehicle Spy. And we're going to start with this method because I want to set up Vehicle Spy from the beginning. So Vehicle Spy starts up, and I already have my Valley CAN connected to my PC. So I'm going to see the device down here. So whatever device you're working with, you'll see down here. For some of our devices, even though they might show here, you might still need to power them up. So like, for example, Fire 2 might show up here, but you do need to have 12 volts to the device in order to connect to it. So in this case, I just want to make sure that my device is going to see some communication before I move on. That's really the purpose of this part. So I'm going to start by opening up Vehicle Spy. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a login name. In this case, I have a couple of them, like default. By default, you get that. And I had done a previous training for graphical panels. So in this case, I'm going to click the plus, and then I'm going to create a new project. So in this case, I'm just going to call it Gateway. All this really does is creates a folder in my directory. So if I click data up here on the top right, it takes me into the Gateway folder. Now, in this Gateway folder, what I do want to do, or the first thing I want to do, is I want to copy over my files that I'm going to be using for this project. Now, I could have them in different locations. It doesn't really matter. In this case, I want to make things easier for me, so I'm going to put everything in one folder. So I'm going to go ahead and close this window, go back to Vehicle Spy. And now the next part I want to do is I want to create a platform, which is going to be the part that's going to reference the database. So I'm going to click this little yellow barrel, the icon. Bring up this window where I can add my database. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the top right, set up platforms, click add. I'm going to give this a name. This can be whatever name you want it to be. Doesn't have to be like what I'm using here. And I'm going to click OK. Now, the name that we give our platform really should be specific to what you're doing. Usually in the classes, when I give trainings, the first thing I say is, if you're going to be working on something for today, or even a week from now, you'll probably remember what you did. But if for some reason you stop touching it or playing, working with it for 6 months, will you remember what you did with that? So the more specific your names are, I think the easier it tends to be to remember. Okay, so to add my database, I'm going to click select DWCAN, which is by default selected. I'm going to click add, and then DBC. So in this case, I'm going to select the DBC I previously created, and then click open. And now one of the boxes is flashing, and that just means I can go and save the changes. So it finishes up loading this DBC file. Go and click save. So now just to see if everything's working properly, I'm going to go Sprite Networks, Messages, so I can view all the communication. And in this case, I'm going to go with Run with Transmit. And then see, now I can see a couple messages decoded. So in this case, each module that I have, or each device, is going to be sending 2 messages. So our Neo ECU12 is sending 2 messages, our Fire 2 is sending 2 messages, and our Red 2 is sending 2 messages. And everything's communicating right now over DWCAN 01, or if you have an older version of EXPI, it'll be HSCAN. I'm showing this slide here because I've seen several users do it this way, where they take 2 CAN buses from a device, and then they plug it in. It would be the equivalent of doing this on the same line, and that just doesn't work. And I understand that everybody's an electrical engineer, and I work with some that are mechanical engineers, so it really doesn't matter the background. But this is, when we do this, the electricity doesn't stop here, go to our device, and then jump back here. Electricity is going to flow in all these directions. So this isn't going to work. So somehow we actually need to break this connection here in order for this to work properly. So in this case, I can literally cut it, and then that would work. But that is a very destructive method, not necessarily the best method. So this is where you might want to use like a breakout box in order to break that communication. Various breakout boxes usually have like banana plugs that are jumpers, or they use jumpers that have banana plugs on them. And then you can just disconnect those pieces, and then you can connect a CAN channel on one side and CAN channel on the other side, and then you can create your bidirectional gateway that way. But again, this is incorrect. So to be correct, in this case, if we go back from the original, drawing, we can see our HSCAN goes straight into Fire 2, and then I'm just kind of piercing these wires here. Now, for me to actually get this to be gated, I actually have to break this connection, so I'll break it here, and then I'll reroute it from that was here, and I'll reroute that straight to HSCAN, and then HSCAN 2 will now be routed over to the HSCAN off of this device. So the communication is not going to go flow through this anymore, or directly. It's going to be flowing through our Intrepid device. So in this case, the ValueCAN. This is the only way that you're going to be able to make this work properly. Okay. So without this, this needs to be in the middle so you can stop the messages. Otherwise, electrically, you cannot stop it if you're using something like this. So let's go back to our vehicle SPI. So now that we know that we can create that we can see messages, we're not getting errors. Now it's a good time to go ahead and rewire. Okay, so let's go online now that everything's been rewired, and let's see what our system does. So here we can see there's the ECU12 like before, and then we can see Red 2, and those are dual wire CAN 1. And then we see that there's now 2 messages in DWCAN 02. And so really now this device is communicating through this channel, and it's going through here. So right now, because we don't have a gateway going yet, this is just communicating to our ValueCAN, and the rest of the system is also communicating to our HSCAN. These two, of course, are communicating back and forth. So now we'll see that these are not decoded. So now we need to update our platform to be able to decode these messages. So I'm going to go to database, and I'm going to add the same my same DBC here and DWCAN 02. So now we can decode both sides. So I'm going to add the same network or same database. Click open. I'm going to click one of the flashing red boxes to save the changes. So now we go back to messages and go back online. We now should see the messages being decoded fully like before, and the Fire 2 is now in DWCAN 02. We can see that here based on the network name, and the original one is created, and the original ones are still on the on CAN 1. So now this is matching this drawing. Okay, so now to create the gateway, we're going to stop Vehicle Spy. And for this, I'm going to go to Embedded Tools. And I'm going to click on Gateway Builder. So Gateway Builder is really, it's a lot of drag and dropping. So our input side is going to be on the left side, and our output is going to be on the right side. So to gateway everything from CAN 1 over to CAN 2, so I want to select CAN 1 over here, and then usually by default it's going to be CAN 1. And then over here, I'm going to select CAN 2. So what I'm going to tell Vehicle Spy is everything that comes in on CAN 1, I want to output it on CAN 2. And I simply now just click on this button up here where it says Gateway Entire Network, and it creates the first part. So this is right now it's a one-way. Now, down here on the bottom right, we see a swap networks. So if I click on that button, it will swap the names of these two that I originally had. Now I could go in here and do the drag, do the drop-down menu, but it's so much easier just to click a button. And then I can click the entire network, Gateway Entire Network. Now, if you're setting this up for the first time, especially on the bench or vehicle, usually this is where I tell most people to stop and then go check that everything starts to gateway before we start adding the fault injection. So now if we go to messages and we go online, we're going to see a couple green dots because now we're having Vehicle Spy transmit some of these messages over from one bus over to the other. So for example, if I pick this 567 message 567, the original message is off DW CAN, and now it's being retransmitted over into DW CAN 2. So in this case, they should be matching exactly from the data from a payload perspective. We're going to see that if we look at the times, the times that they're taking, we're going to see they're going to be very little bit, and that's just simply because keep in mind that the CAN communication uses arbitration. So if it's coming from the ECU 12, it's arbitrating between these two devices right now. So when it goes over to this device and it needs to communicate again on this side, it's going to re-arbitrate this one more time. Again, because this now becomes sort of its own independent network. So Fire 2 is still communicating. So there's going to be some, because of that, we're going to have a re-arbitration. Now, if you're probably thinking, is that going to cause a delay? Generally, no. Maybe at first when you first connect, because the system is, you're now changing it. So if it was starting off at 1 second when you started off, there might be a small delay. Generally, the system will recalibrate itself back to its new time, and it'll be okay. So generally, it's okay. Okay, so now if I get rid of the filter, I can see all the messages, and I can go to the individual ones if I wanted to. So I can click that one. I can type in 1, 2, 3, and we can see the original starts off with the Fire 2, which is DW CAN 2, and now it's being gated over to DW CAN 1. So now we can see that this is going properly. We're not seeing any red dots, meaning there's no bus errors. So this is looking really, really good right now. Now, sometimes visually this is a little confusing. And so what I would recommend is that you go to Spike Networks and then go to Networks here. And then we can add our channels, give it a color. So in this case, I'm going to go to DW CAN 01 or HS CAN, and I'm going to give this red. Now the other channel is DW CAN 2. Now I could spend a few seconds looking for it. I'm not going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little folder. So it just shows me what I have either configured or what's being currently used. So we can see DW CAN is here. And so now I can select a different color for it. Just go and select a different color. So if I want to put it back to normal, just select the other folder, and we can see that it was here. So it wasn't really far, but sometimes in the sea of networks, it could be a little confusing, and this is how we can simplify it in order to see that. So I don't need this now. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to go to messages, and we see there's no colors. So down here on the bottom left, we have a couple, you can see a couple of network colors. This first one is for messages. So if I had any user-defined messages, I could color them individually. But if I do the second button, it's network colors. So now I can clearly see the networks that are being used. Or I can simply also use the filter or the sort function, and then sort them based on the different buses. So there's multiple ways to visualize this. Sometimes when we're just sometimes when we're just testing, we focus usually on one message and one message alone. So for example, if I wanted to manipulate this ECU 12, well, then maybe I want to do 5, 6, 7. And then I can see the original message. And then this is the gated message. Okay, so that gives me my bidirectional gateway. So that's the beginning of it. So now that we've verified our network is working properly, we can go back to Gateway Builder. Now I am going to add I do need to exclude the message that I want to manipulate. So in this case, I'm going to specifically select this ECU 12, message 1, because I want to manipulate I'm going to create a loss of comp for this, and I'm also going to manipulate some of the data inside of it. So for that, the first thing I need to do is I need to drag it, I need to exclude it off the CAN 1 where it's coming in, and exclude it off to the other side. Now here, I'm going to drag it in, and it's not going to let me drag it in. I do need to stop vehicle spy in order to modify this. So now if I can drag this, left click and hold, I can drag it in to exclude it. So what I'm telling vehicle spy is here is when you gateway everything here, don't gateway this one. Okay, because again, this is going to override what we're about to do. So next part that we're going to do, we're going to take this message and now we're going to drag it in the middle. So what we're doing is we're telling in the network 1, we want to exclude it, but we're going to add it now back in because we want to manipulate this. If I didn't do the exclusion, when I manipulate this will generally take over. So now I have the message included. If we want to see how that looks, I can just click delete because I had it selected. And now we can go to messages, run with transmit. And this message is the this ECU 12 message 1, which is 5, 6, 7. And so we can see that it's coming in HSCAN 1, but it's not being output on the other side. And that's just because I excluded it. So now to add it back in, I'm going to click on the first network, and I'm going to drag it in. Because this is coming in HSCAN 1, and then I want this to go on CAN 2. Okay, so now if I go back to my messages, and I go back online, we now should see the original one with a gated message on top of that, or on the other side. Now that we verified that the message is being gated properly, we can go ahead and stop vehicle spy. And then I'm going to go to Gateway Builder. And now we're going to start adding conditions to enable this message to be active or inactive, or really where we create a loss of comm versus a normal communication. So the first thing we're going to do now is I'm going to go to Scripting and Automation, Application Signals. I'm going to add, and then I'm going to do a loss of comm enable. It really could be just enable criteria, for example. It could be whatever you want it to be. In this case, I'm going to leave all these as is. I am going to change the initial value to be 1 because I want the communication to be active in this specific case when we start up. You are not required to do an initial value. I like my gateways to be very consistent. So if I started today and I started up tomorrow or started 3 weeks from now, I want it to always start the same exact way. I don't like to guess how it's going to start up. I don't like fighting the tool, and I like consistency. So from here, I just added my app signal. And so from here, I'm going to go to Gateway Builder, click Condition, FX, and then you select app signals here, double click so we can add that condition, and click OK. So now I'm going to add this now to a graphical panel. So now I'm going to link this over so I can change this dynamically, but manually, of course. So I'm going to go to Measurement, Graphical Panels. From here, there's a lot of things that we could use to map this. I'm going to use this little radar button today. And so from here, I'm going to go to Properties of it. I'm going to use the app signal. So app signal here, double click, and click OK. And then this one's going to be the and so whenever 0, this loss of comm is going to be active. And I'm going to copy and paste this, right click, copy, right click, paste. I could also do Control V, Control C, or sorry, Control C and Control V. And so from here, I'm going to do inactive. So here's going to be a value of 1. So here, normally I want my inactive to be on top and active at the bottom. Really doesn't matter which way you do it. So I'm going to highlight these two, right click, and I'm going to do alignment to the left. I moved a little bit, it's not significant. So from here, the fonts look pretty small, so I'm going to go to font, and I'm going to change this font over to 12, so I can make this bigger. So here I'm going to do the alignment to be left, so I don't like the way that looks. And then I think we're good here. I can highlight it one more time, do align lefts. Okay, they look pretty good. So I'm going to lock this window, so I can use these buttons. I'm going to left click and hold this window, and I'm going to dock it in this little box here. And I'm going to shrink this up a little bit. I'm going to go to messages. And when we start up, we should be gating the message. So now we have the message, the original message, and the other one's being transmitted. And we can see that by the green dot, but we can also look at the counts to make sure that they're going up and they're both equal. So now to create my loss of comm, all I have to do is now activate this button, and then we'll see that the count stops going up. So that means the message is no longer being gated. However, the rest of the information is still being gated. So if I go into this part now, we can see that this part is not being negated because we can see the count is not changing, but everything else is being gated properly. And so we're creating the loss of comm off of just this one message. So now if I can go turn this back on, we'll see that the message comes back online. And of course, I can turn this off at will. So here's the message still highlighted in green. We can see that it's not going up. I can turn that back on. Now, in this case, if I want to see an effect, or what we're expecting for the system to change, it could be a DTC. But in this case, I actually mapped it over to the signal. So right now, everything's communicating properly. Let's see what happens when we create a loss of comm. And so now we can see that we detected a loss of communication. So if I turn it back on, I can see my communication goes back to normal. So what you're looking for will vary. In this case, I have a message that's telling me this information. If you're in your system, you could have a message that tells you that maybe something's going valid, or simply you get a diagnostic trouble code, so diagnostics trouble code, so DTC. So you might have to request diagnostics in order to see this part. So that's how you would create a loss of communication. So now we're going to play how to change values that are going on route. So in this case, I'm going to do the device state. So I'm going to drag in the signal into the middle. And so if you look at the message, this only gives me a condition. But when I look at the signal, it allows me to do an expression. So I can change the value, and it allows me to do a condition as well to enable when this actually takes over, or when I pass through the original values. So I'm going to go application signals. I'm going to add two new signals, two new app signals. The first one is going to be state enable. Next one's going to be state value. And a state enable, I'm going to do this to a 1. And state value, I'm just going to leave that at 0 for now. We can always change that if needed. I just don't want this to be initially active. So in this case, the way I have it logically set up is to be 1. Okay, so I'm going to go Gateway Builder. I'm going to click on Expression, click the FX, and I'm going to go to App Signals. And the first one is going to be Value. So I'm going to double click OK. And then the condition is going to be the other one. So I'm going to click FX and then click Enable, double click OK. So now in my graphical panel, I'm going to unlock. And I'm going to add one of these radio buttons one more time. So I'm copying and pasting. So this one's going to be signal, and then this one's going to be the enable. So double click so it updates the value. Click OK. And then this one's going to be state enable. And so enabled is 0. So now I'm going to copy this. I'm going to do copy, paste. And then this one's going to be disable. I'm going to click one. I'm doubting myself here. So I know that I want it when it's enabled. We want it to be 0. When it's disabled, it's 1. Okay, so that is correct. At least I think it is. And that we'll find out when we start playing with it. Okay, so now I'm going to highlight all these, and I'm going to do a line to the left. And then I'm going to add one more thing, which is a list, which is this one here. Now here, List is really the enumerations that are available for that signal. So here, there's a trick. I could go into the application signal and go into the value here, and I could create a state encoding and then add all the individual states. But I am lazy, so I'm going to go into here and I'm going to go to signals, and then I'm going to go to my database. And in this case, what we're going to be altering is this message here, message 1, and then the device state. So I'm going to double click OK, and then just above it, there's a list. I'm going to double click here, and I'm going to load from signal. And so that adds all my values. Click OK. And now what I want to do is I want to go back to the app signal and then do the state enable, the state value, double click and click OK. So instead of me going in here and adding all the individual pieces, I'm leveraging Vehicle Spy to do this for me. So now if I do lock, I can see I have all the individual values instead of 0, 1, 2, or 3. So this is usually a little bit more easier, more intuitive, right? We're not guessing what the value is. Again, once you're creating this from the first time, again, you'll remember what you're doing, but sometimes having this value is great. Now, if you don't need to change values dynamically, you can always select this to be, I can go to like the gateway builder, and it's just, instead of selecting the app signal, I could just say, I just want to be a value of 2, for example. So whenever I enable the signal to be overridden, I'll just pass a value of 2. I find that to be very restrictive because in the future, we don't know what values we need to use. So I like to have the drop-down option so I can change this at will. So if I know if it's going to be always value 2, well, then I can set up my app signal to be set up, default values of 2. And then maybe I never have to set it up. It's not hard to set up this from scratch from the beginning. It's just easier to do it from originally. So I'm going to go back to my state value, click OK. And so now we're going to go messages, and now we're going to start up Vehicle Spy. So we can see by default we start with 0. And then here we're going to do we're going to do 5, 6, 7. So the original message is just, it's passing a value, valid, and communicating. So here now when I enable this, we can see that it changes the value. Well, we see it changes things, but it looks like I got my names incorrect again. And I do this all the time. I will get it one of these days. But sometimes I think I like doing it this live so you can see that you can always go back and fix things. So enable. So if I go back to enable, so that really disables it. And so we want to rename this to be disable. I guess I could have changed the numbers too. And then this really enables it. Okay, so let's go enable. That passes my value through, and then disable. So really when I do disable here, I'm letting the message go as normal. So whatever the value is, we're going to pass it through. And then when I enable this, it's going to pass whatever I'm telling it here. So I can change this to be loss of comm. I can change this to be communicating. I can change this to whatever I need it to be. So in this case, there isn't an override, but I definitely want to show you how to change that. Let's say we want to do the validity now. So I'm going to highlight these 2. I'm going to copy them and paste. I'm going to go ahead and just align them now. So here is going to be validity disabled, validity enabled. And so now I'm going to go back to my application signals, add 2 more signals. So I'm going to do validity enabled, validity valid. So back to Gateway Builder. Now I can pass this like the device state value, pass the oh, I always forget that I stop this. Go back here. I don't always forget, but I do have moments where I do forget. So now here I'm going to go into the signal, add expression, FX. In this case, we're going to do the validity value. Click OK. condition is going to be the enable. Double click OK. So here, enable. And then we're going to put this to be 0. Okay, so from here I can go to the gateway builder. That looks good. I have mapped the signals down here. Up here, I'm going to map these to be the validity enable. And then I'm going to double click on validity enable. Click OK. And then for this one, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do a drop down. So I can use the original one, copy, paste. But in this case, it's going to have the old values, so or the drop down option. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the database, the ECU12, and then valid, invalid. Click OK. So I'm going to clear everything. Load. Click OK. And I'm going to remap this back to the app signal. And I'm going to be the validity value. And then click OK. So I'm going to align these to be aligned to the left. Lock the window. Shrink this down. And then I'm going to go ahead and start vehicle spy, messages. And then here we're going to go and disable this. So here we're passing the invalid. If I disable this, it passes back to the original one that's above. And so we can alter these values as needed here. Okay, so now we go back to messages view. I'm going to get rid of that filter. And so now if I go into like my Fire 2, for example, where is it? So I want to go to the first message. So we have valid and invalid data. So if I get rid of if I go back to normal, I can go back to my normal communication. If I enable this, it's receiving invalid data. And so depending on what I'm doing here, I can create a loss of comm, for example. I should change here momentarily. Loss of comm detected, then I can go back to normal. So it looks like in this case, I actually want to be using 0 as an initial point for these. So I'm going to go to the enable, change this over to 0, and to 0. Go ahead and lock the window. So now from here, I can go ahead and save out my setup. So I can do File, Save As, and then I can name name this appropriately. Gateway save. So I'm going to save it off as a VS3, which is really a file that's really good when you're working just on your own. If I wanted to share this file with somebody else, I can do File, Save As, and then I'm going to click this so it gives me the name, and then I can do as VS3 zip, and then I can click Save. So VS3 is something you could share. So the VS3 contains all the files that someone could use, or that all the files that you use to create your gateway, and then someone else can use that to leverage that work. So that gives us our basic gateway. Okay, so I'm going to go back and check it one more time, just so I can build up my own confidence that everything's working as expected. So here I can go into my message, my ECU message that's being gated, and I can create a loss of comm. We see that it stops updating. A few seconds later, this should say loss of comm. So we know that part is working. Now I can go into this part to do to change this to NIT. In this case, I don't expect to see anything changing on the Fire 2. Just I can alter the value here from the original one. Then disable it, go back to normal. And then here in the validity, I can change this validity, and then we should see a response up here. So if I'm using validity, for example, to say invalid, and then I create a loss of comm immediately after that, we can test the scenario. We can create 2 scenarios back to back. If you have any questions, you can always contact our tech support team. Don't be afraid to call us. We are here to help you. Thank you.